The moment I stepped into my graduation party, I saw it. My father's hand hovering over my champagne glass, a faint drift of powder dissolving before the bubbles settled. The room clapped for a future they thought they understood, lights glowing warm against a truth no one else seemed to notice. I didn't speak. I didn't flinch. I just stood smiling and carried that glass across the ballroom to my sister, placing it gently into her waiting hand. She drank without hesitation, and as the applause rose again, I realized the real question wasn't what they planned for me, but why they needed it. I learned early what it meant to take up less space in a family that pretended to love symmetry. Long before the ballroom lights and the champagne stem trembling in my hand, there was a smaller room, a smaller stage, and a smaller version of me standing beside a girl who never had to earn the spotlight she lived in. I was 9 the first time I understood the pattern. It was an elementary school award ceremony held in a cafeteria that smelled of warm plastic and orange drink. I'd spent weeks on a science poster, hand-drawn charts carefully labeled diagrams. Celine, 2 years older, had forgotten hers at home and slapped together something during recess. When they called her name, my parents rose so fast their chairs scraped the floor. Damien pulled out his phone. Clarice clapped with a sharp, delighted precision. My name wasn't called at all. I remember staring at the reflection of the fluorescent lights bouncing off the waxy tile beneath my shoes. I remember the exact sound my Aunt Helena made when she exhaled beside me, a quiet, measured breath that felt like a warning. After the ceremony, while everyone fussed over Celine, she bent to my height and straightened the collar of my shirt. "Due to," the she whispered, even though she spoke English everywhere else. "Not your silence, just your posture." I didn't understand it then. I do now. Years passed, but the script rarely changed. At 14, I placed first in a citywide math competition. Damien told relatives that Celine had been the one tutoring me. When I tried correcting him, Clarice's hand brushed my shoulder in a way that froze the rest of my sentence. "Don't make this complicated," she murmured, smiling brightly for the guests. At 16, Celine was given a used car for her birthday. I received a planner, the kind with inspirational quotes and blank grids. "A tool for someone who knows how to stay organized?" Clarice said. Damien nodded as if that were praise. I wrote in it for 2 months, then stopped when I realized every page felt like an instruction to become smaller. College didn't change anything. Every scholarship I earned was met with a story about how we worked hard to support both our girls. Every project I finished was retold as something Celine helped guide. I stopped correcting the details. It was like tossing stones into the ocean, the surface barely changed. There was one night in particular I returned to more than I want to admit. A family dinner at a restaurant overlooking the water. I'd just received notice of a research placement, something competitive, something I wanted. I waited for the right moment to share, timing my breath with the rise and fall of conversation. When I finally spoke, Celine interrupted halfway through to announce she'd been invited to a networking brunch. My parents erupted with admiration. My words hung unfinished in the air like steam before dissolving. Rowan, who'd come along that night, noticed. I saw their eyes flick to me, caught between sympathy and caution. They were the first person to ever say, "I saw that." Patterns don't emerge from grand stories. They come from repetition. The missed acknowledgments, the overwritten achievements, the practiced smiles, the way a room rearranges itself around one person's comfort. By the time I reached graduation, I didn't need anyone to explain my place in the family narrative. I'd been living in the margin for years. What I didn't know, what none of us knew yet, was how quickly a margin could become the center when someone finally stopped shrinking. The ballroom was loud enough to feel alive, but quiet enough for intentions to hide. I could sense the hierarchy the moment I stepped inside, who drifted towards Celine, who hovered near my parents, who offered me the polite nod reserved for someone technically invited but not essential to the room. I found my seat near the kitchen doors, the heat from the swinging panels brushing the back of my chair every time a server passed. A placement meant to look accidental. Clarice excelled at arrangements that didn't appear arranged. Across the room, Celine laughed at something Damien whispered to her. Their silhouettes were framed by the soft glow of the chandeliers, a picture so polished it almost convinced me it was real. I traced a fingertip along the rim of my water glass, steadying my breath, the way Helena had taught me: one measured inhale, one measured release. Then, The host called for a toast. Champagne flutes appeared like synchronized choreography. I watched the server set mine down, a clean, cold stem catching the light. I reached for it just as Damien moved in behind me. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His hand hovered above my glass fingers, adjusting a fork that didn't need adjusting. His body blocked the view from most of the room, but not from me. I saw the small motion, the slight tilt, a faint dust drifting into the bubbles before dissolving, a ripple, a swirl, then nothing. He stepped back with the practiced ease of a man who'd done this sort of thing before, sleight of hand, sleight of truth, sleight of daughter. Clarice glanced over her smile, holding just a beat too long as if waiting for something to begin. I kept my posture, smoothed my dress once, lifted the glass without drinking. For a moment, the room blurred into soft shapes, gold-white movement, while the center of it sharpened to one truth: I wasn't meant to walk out of this night untouched. But I would choose how the story shifted next. I didn't drink the champagne. I let the bubbles settle while my pulse steadied into something almost calm. Across the room, Selene lifted her own glass in a half-hearted cheer, oblivious, glowing in the soft light, like she had been cast instead of born. Damien's eyes flicked toward me once, quick assessing, before he turned to greet another round of guests. Clarice followed his lead, her smile gleaming, her posture proud, the perfect mother in the perfect scene. But scenes are only scenes, and I'd spent my whole life watching the edges. I set the champagne down. The stem clicked softly against the linen, but the sound felt louder than it should have, like a starting bell. Rowan caught my eye from across the room, their camera hanging loose at their side. They tilted their heads slightly, the silent question, "Did you see it?" I gave a single nod. I stood smoothing the front of my dress and made my way toward the hallway behind the reception area. The air shifted as soon as I stepped past the last table, quieter, cooler, stripped of performance. This was the part of events people didn't photograph, the part where truth moved unobserved. In the corridor, I pulled my clutch closer and opened it just enough to see the documents Helena had given me earlier. Scholarship confirmations, payment records, financial statements I recognized immediately. She hadn't explained why she carried them. She never explained anything unless necessary. All she said when she slipped them into my hand on the balcony was, "When the moment comes, use these." At the time, I didn't know which moment she meant. Now I did. I moved deeper into the hall, away from the music, until all I could hear was the low hum of the building's ventilation and the muffled laughter bleeding through the walls. I stopped beside a service door. The thin seam of light beneath it told me someone was inside. I waited, listening. Voices. Damien's first quiet, clipped steady. "Just make sure she drinks it. She won't cause a scene if it happens fast." Then Milas, the event coordinator, her tone professional, detached. "The toast gives us a clean moment. Once the room is distracted, a rustle, a soft click, then Clarice's voice low and certain. It needs to look natural. A faint spell, nothing more. She'll recover. People will assume stress." Stress. The word landed like a cold hand against my spine. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just memorized every syllable. Then footsteps. I stepped back into the shadow until the door cracked open and the three of them walked past me unaware. Their plan wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even imaginative. It was administrative, controlled, a narrative adjustment, the kind of quiet rewrite families like mine excelled at. But they'd made one mistake. They assumed I wasn't watching. I slid the clutch closed and walked back toward the ballroom. My breath was steady, my posture straight. No one glanced at me as I passed, not out of malice but habit. I'd been invisible for years. Tonight, invisibility finally became useful. Back at my table, Rowan approached, pretending to check the lighting near the floral arrangements. Their voice barely carried. "I recorded his hand over your glass." "It's clear." I didn't look at the phone they held, though I saw the reflection of a paused frame, the faint swirl in the champagne. "Keep it safe," I whispered. "Not yet." Rowan slipped the phone back into their pocket and blended into the crowd again, moving as if they belonged to every table and none. I picked up the champagne glass again. Not to drink, just to hold. Its weight felt different now. Not a threat, a tool, a symbol of a choice I hadn't asked for but suddenly understood. Across the room, Celine turned and caught my eye. She smiled, oblivious, the kind of smile that assumed affection without ever offering it. She lifted her glass a fraction, a silent toast to herself. I walked toward her through a sea of warm lights and colder intentions. "Yours is warmer," I said when I reached her table, offering my glass without a tremor. "Trade." She laughed lightly. "You and your details, Violet." She took it without hesitation. One switch, one moment, one gesture as gentle as returning a borrowed item. No accusation, no drama. Nothing to cling to and say she meant harm. Just a quiet correction, a narrative shifted back into truth. I returned to my seat and picked up the new glass. My breath steadied. My shoulders loosened. The ballroom continued its swirl of conversation and carefully curated celebration. Damien watched me from across the room, expression unreadable. Clarice touched his arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. But for the first time all night, I didn't feel small. I felt aligned, because they'd built a plan meant to collapse me quietly. They hadn't considered what would happen if I let gravity fall the other way. The room shifted the way a tide does quietly at first, then all at once. Milas stepped onto the small stage, her sequined dress catching the chandelier light. She tapped the microphone twice, summoning the next portion of the evening with the kind of confidence only someone following a script can hold. "Everyone," she said, "please raise your glasses for our graduate." Around the ballroom, champagne flutes lifted in a shimmering arc. The room glowed gold. Everyone looked where they were supposed to look. Everyone except Rowan. They stood near the edge of the crowd, hand already slipping into their pocket waiting. I kept my glass low. Not enough to draw notice. Just enough to watch. Across the table, Selene lifted hers, the glass Damien had prepared, and smiled at the guests clustered around her. She didn't sip yet. She liked to wait for the exact moment attention swung her way. Damien's gaze flicked between us. Just once. Quick. Nervous. The toast began. To Violet, Mayalis declared. A brilliant young woman with a bright future ahead of her. A line written with elegance and spoken without sincerity. Celine finally brought the glass to her lips. A small sip. Barely more than a taste. The room applauded, oblivious. Nothing dramatic happened. No stumble, no gasp, just a soft tightening around her eyes, a faint press of her hand to her temple. The harmless mixture Damien intended only caused slight dizziness, enough to embarrass, enough to derail, enough to create a story. She blinked once, twice. The edges of her posture softened. Around her, people murmured gentle concern, then confusion. Rowan's camera didn't move. They recorded everything, pivoting slowly as though adjusting focus rather than capturing truth. I rose. Not to help her, not to speak, but to walk toward the AV booth at the far corner of the ballroom. The technician inside looked up when I approached. He was young, nervous, and unfamiliar with the currents of our family, which made him perfect. "I need this played," I said quietly, sliding the USB onto the console. "Right now." He hesitated only a second, then nodded. His fingers moved. The ballroom screen flickered. The slideshow of curated family photos vanished. In its place, a still frame of Damien's hand hovering over a champagne glass. A hush fell so suddenly, it felt like the room had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. The video played in silence, Rowan's recording clear and undeniable. The slight bend of Damien's body blocking the view, the tilt of his wrist, the faint powder dissolving into bubbles. Nothing exaggerated, nothing dramatic, just truth framed in gold light. Then the moment of the glass exchange, me standing smiling, offering it to Celine. A gesture so ordinary it became shocking under the magnified quiet. No narration, no explanation, just image and implication. Celine's eyes widened as she stared at the screen, realizing what she had drunk was not meant to harm her, but meant to humiliate me. The dizziness she felt made sense now. Her gaze snapped to Damien, searching for denial that didn't come. Clarice took a small step back, not toward her daughter, but away from what the room was beginning to understand. Helena stepped forward, then calm and deliberate, lifting the folder she had carried all night. "These are Violet's documents," she said simply. "Payments she made herself, scholarships she earned, records they've rewritten for years." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Whispers moved like a current through the crowd. Confusion cracked into recognition. Admiration shifted into suspicion. The image of our perfected family began to buckle under the weight of a single recorded truth. Damien opened his mouth, but whatever explanation he'd rehearsed evaporated before sound formed. I stood near the base of the screen, the champagne glass still in my hand. My voice, when it came, was steady. "You wanted a story," I said. "This one tells itself. No anger, no theatrics, only alignment." Celine lowered herself into a chair, breathing slowly, her face pale but clear. Rowan stood beside her, offering quiet support. The guests stepped back, creating distance from the people they'd applauded minutes earlier. The chandelier light trembled across the glass in my hand. This was the moment the narrative finally shifted. Not because I forced it, but because they exposed themselves. When the last frame faded from the screen, the room softened into something unrecognizable. Conversations broke apart. Shoes shifted. No one knew where to stand anymore. I stepped away from the crowd, letting the noise settle behind me like dust after a collapse. Outside the ballroom doors, the hallway felt cooler, still, almost kind. I walked without urgency, my fingers brushing the edge of the clutch Helena had given me the documents inside, resting with a kind of anchored calm. For the first time in years, my shoulders didn't tighten when I breathed. My name, my place felt like something I owned, not something I had to defend. Celine's faint dizziness passed quickly. I saw her seated upright, drinking water clarity, returning to her expression. There was no anger in me toward her, only understanding. We had both lived in a narrative someone else wrote, though, in different roles. I reached the balcony overlooking the water, the same place Helena had pressed the envelope into my hand. The night air touched my skin, cool and open. The city lights trembled on the surface below, scattering into quiet shapes. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the silence fill the spaces where explanation used to live. No triumph, no revenge, just distance from a story that had always been too small for me. Behind me, the ballroom hummed with the aftermath of truth. Ahead was nothing defined, nothing promised, and the absence of their script felt like the first real freedom I'd ever had. In the quiet that followed, I understood something simple. Freedom isn't loud. It's the moment you choose your own story without asking permission. If this resonated with you, stay with us, subscribe, like, and share for more stories where truth finally finds its voice.